Welcome to this 29th day of our Advent devotional journey together. One of the last 3 devotions we'll be sharing on this journey. This one addresses John Wesley's question, can I lift my hand up to heaven and declare to him that lives forever and ever, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. We'll be hearing this devotion as it was written by Reverend Matt Rowell, and I'll present it to you right now. Let's jump into it. Psalms 139 begins with, O Lord, you have searched me and know me. God knows us better than we know ourselves, and the good news is that God still bothers to be our God. That's amazing. The writer goes on in the 4th verse, even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You see, if God knows everything that we're going to say or do, some might ask, then what's the point? Why pray? Why seek God's guidance and express our desires? Some may hear this psalm as an expression of God's glory, power, and magnificence. But I think a better reading of this familiar psalm, he says, is an expression of God's patience and grace. It's humbling to hear that God knows what we're going to say, and yet God has the patience to listen anyway. It is a knowledge that certainly surpasses his own understanding for God, to know and search and completely continue to covenant on the way that leads to life. God may indeed know what we're going to pray, he says, before we have the courage to form our words, but God is not a manager who is interested in the daily report. God is fundamentally interested in you. Think of it this way, Matt says. Every morning before leaving the office, I always tell my wife, I love you. Saying I love you is not a conveyance of information. Rather, it's an investment in a relationship. I love that he does that, and I love his understanding of it. The psalm continues with, for it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Great words from verses 13 and 14. And then he invites us for a moment to hear this psalm from Jesus' lip. Christmas is a celebration remembering that God put on flesh and was born to show us what God's love is. Hearing this psalm as a part of Jesus' praise offers a beautiful and haunting frame through which to hear these words to God's. Where can I go from your spirit? If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. Even the darkness is not dark to you. In your book were written all the days that were formed for me. Those are verses 7, 8, 12, and 16. And wow, they do take on a different haunting message when you receive them as if from the lips of Christ. Could it be that this psalm, he says, was part of Jesus' devotion, so private that even the gospel writers knew to record it? Then he wants to know, what does it mean to us that God knows all things and remains in loving and covenant relationship with us? Although this is an Easter story, this psalm reminds me and reminds Matt of when Jesus met Peter on the lakeshore after the resurrection. I was thinking of that too, weren't you? Jesus is standing around that charcoal fire, similar to the fire around which Peter had stood, denying that he knew Jesus. In other words, Jesus knew, and appropriately asked Peter, do you love me? 3 times he asks, which may seem heavy-handed or almost abrasive, until we take a step back and recognize that Jesus is offering forgiveness for each time that Peter denied him. Near the end of the story, Peter seems offended and replies, Lord, you know I love you. Of course, Jesus knew that. But sometimes we just have to say it out loud, and often more than once. That exchange between between Peter and Jesus is contained in the Gospel of John, the 21st chapter, the 15th, 16th, 17th verses. You can read more about it there. But this exchange between Jesus and Peter was not about sharing information. Rather, it was about the kind of love and patient grace God has for us in the person of Jesus. The Lord searches us and knows all things, and yet still invites us into the life of God. May we all, he declares, speak loudly these words. You know that I love you. And may we mean them from the depths of our hearts. Blessings this 29th day of our Advent devotional journey together.